many people say that everyone's got a story in them, which is the story of their own story, their own life. And that's very true. But there is a big difference between just having a story that is your life and a story that is actually crafted as a story. There are many things that go into technicalities that go into making a story. This would be one thing that your listeners might want to ask themselves. Do you want to be an author? Do you want to be a writer? Or do you just want to write a book? Because if it's the book that you want to write that is sort of your story, it might be the only thing that you want to do. And that would take you in a very different direction, because to become a writer, it's a long, long process.
Welcome to the Minute Mastery Podcast, a conversational productivity and time management podcast where busy authors and entrepreneurs are inspired to create time for what truly matters. I'm your host, Ngozi Edema. I'm a time management coach, writer, and entrepreneur. Here, you are encouraged to turn your minutes into milestones and to create at least 1 hour a day working on your goals without feeling overwhelmed. And since you are here, I thought I'd let you know of a storybook to gift your favorite kids. Once upon a time, and they lived happily ever after. Children love those phrases. I love them too, and I suspect you may love them too. As a mom, I've spent hours reading and listening to my children read their favorite stories, and now I write stories too. Here is one of them you may want to check out. The Proud Sunflower. It is the story of Princess Sanzu, the Sunflower Princess, a princess loved by all, but who got into trouble. Within the pages of The Proud Sunflower, you encounter what real beauty is. Your kid will love the beautiful story and powerful illustrations. The Proud Sunflower serves as a gentle reminder that we all need to stand on the shoulders of others to succeed. So, read this story with your little ones and allow it to illuminate the universal language of empathy, forgiveness, and personal growth. The Proud Sunflower is a top book of parenting, morals, and responsibility, and it's available on the Kindle store and on paperback formats. Excellent for beginner readers. Click in this episode show notes or in the description on YouTube to order yours. And check out my other storybooks to read with your kids, or gift a child a storybook if you do not have kids of your own. Today's guest brings a beautiful blend of history, adventure, and fierce womanhood to her writing. Cinda Gault is a writer of stories about tenacious women who refuse to sit still, whether they are navigating the rugged 19th century wilderness or fighting for meaning in a modern city. Her work explores what survives history, what gets forgotten, and what courage looks like in every era. If you love storytelling, historical depth, and the power of women who persist, then this episode will inspire you. So let's dive in. You're welcome to the show, Cinda.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
Thank you very much for coming. So start us off. You tell stories about the 1970s, and I'm really interested in that because I'm a 70s baby. So what was it like to live in the 1970s? Let's start from there.
Okay. The 1970s was a very exciting decade for women in Canada because it was a tumultuous time and things were changing, and they were changing fast. One source of this was in Canada. That's the context I can speak in. We had the Divorce Act in 1968, which made it much easier for people to get divorced. You didn't have to have some egregious thing that happened. It could just be marriage breakdown. And apparently there was a great big pent up desire for divorce because all through the 70s, the divorce rate soared. And so you had a lot of tumultuousness with families, in that they were breaking up, they were reconfiguring, and there was that kind of really basic confusion going on. And a lot of what was driving that was what women wanting something different. The women of the 1950s, the 90s housewives, were a discontented generation in the sense that this was the whole Betty Friedan feminine mystique time, when women were expected to be homemakers and mothers and did not expect to go out into the world. So their success in the world was through their husbands. And so there was a lot of emotional turmoil in the public square about this. And so the Divorce Act really opened the floodgates for that to come out and start changing things. So women started going out to work in numbers that they never had before. Women went into post-secondary education the way they never had before. Back then, most post-secondary education students were men. Now it's women. It's flipped. You also had many things going on as far as women's autonomy reproductively, because you had the pill for the first time being available in mass production. And so young women in the sexual revolution could make sure that they didn't suffer the consequences that women of other generations had suffered in pregnancy. They could determine whether or not they got pregnant. And in Canada, there was the whole story of Henry Morgentaler, who was the doctor who basically brought the nation to its knees about the abortion law. First of all, he refined the vacuum aspirator. So abortion was no longer the dangerous thing it was before, because he refined the tool that was used for it, that made it much, because of him and the fight that he had that got right up to the Supreme Court, the abortion law in Canada was knocked down. And we are the only Western country in the world that does not have an abortion law. And there's no stomach in Canada to try to develop one. So we go on with his legacy of women having autonomy over their own reproductive system. So all of this was going on at the same time. You had a burgeoning of what women could do as far as their jobs were concerned. You know, I became a prison guard in a men's prison during that time. That was a job that women weren't normally allowed into. And you had all kinds of firsts like that for women going and doing things that they had never done before. So that's heady stuff. That's exciting to do. And at the same time, they did not have the dangers they had before, that any kind of sexual exploration could lead to pregnancy. So, and of course, there was the music, the fashion, the everything else that was involved at that time too. But I would say that the two main movements, social movements that characterized the time, were second wave feminism, that had basically reproductive issues and sort of jobs and school as the main issues of what they could do. And it was a time of Canadian nationalism. So I haven't talked about that, but in my PhD thesis, I was looking at these two movements as lenses through which Canadians tended to look at life back then.
Oh,
My dad used to say I asked a simple question.
thank you. So now let's go into your writing.
Okay.
You combine history and modern times, your journey into writing. What brought you there?
Well, I did not intend on being a writer when I was young. I hear a lot of stories by authors that say I knew at 5 I wanted to be a writer, and that was not the case with me. I always loved school, so I loved reading and writing, and even though I had a fairly tumultuous adolescence, I still knew that school was in my future, and that was always going to be my North Star. So I've spent a lot of time in school. But I was always following my interests, and they took me in the 1970s. I was one of those young feminists running around setting up rape crisis centers and shelters for victims of domestic violence. And I, together with a number of other women at the University of Guelph, which is where we went, we started a university club called Women in Crisis, and we set up a distress line for victims of sexual assault. And I became the first director and set up the shelter for victims of domestic violence. And I did that. When I completed that project, I decided I had worked with victims for a period of time. I wanted to go check out some perpetrators. So that's when I became a prison guard at a maximum security wing of a correctional center. And the inmates in there were either convicted of sexual assault or arson or had mental or emotional problems. And I worked there for 13 months, and then I went on to University of Toronto, and I did my MA in criminology and did my thesis on domestic violence. And I got finished all that. I graduated, got the job of my dreams as a director of a social service agency, and I hated it. I hated every second of it. So
Why?
Because I realize I do not like managing people. I do not like it when it's I've never had a problem with motivating myself to work. So I don't like it that it's my job to make other people do their jobs. And it just, it seems like being their mummy, and they're not cute enough to warrant a mummy at that age. So I was at a crossroads. I knew I had to figure out something else I was going to do. And working in the real world is going to be difficult no matter what you do. So I wanted to make sure that I chose something that was going to be worth whatever I had to bleed for. And that's when I decided telling stories was going to be something that I was willing to do some suffering for, because it's such a pleasurable thing to do. It is fun to be writing stories and making up a whole world, and you live in that world and you can determine the world you live in. So I decided I was willing to do some suffering for that, but I still had to make a living. And so at the time, what was selling was romance. It's still what pays many people's bills. So I had never read one before, but now I was consuming them by the dozens and figuring out what you needed to do. And that resulted in my first novel called Past Convictions. And it's a whole story in and of itself. And I was telling you a little bit before we came on that it went in many languages and around the world. And then 37 years later, I got the chance to revise it and get rid of the technology at the time and replace it with new technology. And it was just republished a month ago by my present publisher. So that was one decision I decided on, was to become a writer. And then the second thing was I needed to go back to school in English. I had gone through in social sciences, but you can't write a fiction story the way you write a social science essay, because if you say who done it on the first page, there's no story. And that would be your thesis statement in a psychology essay, but it's not going to carry its weight in fiction. And so that was the second thing. And that I went back to school. I caught fire in English. I went on, did another MA in English, and I went on to do my PhD. So that was a whole long project as well. And I ended up doing a thesis on Canadian women writers who came to publishing prominence during the years 1965 to 1980. So it included the 70s. And they were Margaret Atwood, Margaret Lawrence, and Marian Engel. And I looked at their work through the lenses of the second wave women's movement and Canadian nationalism at the time. So that's a whole story. And then the third one was I decided to have my babies. And I had 2 sons during that time. So I started back for my second MA with a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old. And if you ever want to make somebody really miserable, suggest they do that. So I had these big projects that took a lot of years on my shoulders for all of those years. And when I graduated from my PhD, it was around the same time my 2 sons mercifully went off to university themselves. And I was teaching, but I was also able to go back and start writing again. And that's when I began researching for my first historical novel. It's called This God-Forsaken Place. And that's a whole other story.
So why are you drawn to historical storytelling?
Well, I would say because of my training doing a PhD, you do a lot of research. And I was a Canadianist, still am. And so there's a lot of research that goes into that. The era that I focused on as far as the writing was concerned was 1965 to 1980. And believe it or not, that's historical now. Apparently anything more than 50 years is considered historical. So I'm talking historical here. So I set that novel in the 1970s, but the other 2 were in the 19th century. So obviously I wasn't alive then. And one was in 1885 with the Louis Riel Rebellion, right in your territory, as the backdrop. And then the other one was in 1806, so earlier in the century. And I bumped into the ideas for these stories in ways that I wouldn't have expected. For example, the second one, A Small Compass, it was set in 1806 because I bumped into, quite by accident, an asterisk in a fur trader's journal that said, an unusual thing happened tonight. An Orkney lad, because the Hudson's Bay Company hired its employees over in Orkney, Scotland, because apparently the Scottish farmers were far easier to control than their British counterparts. So they went and hired their employees from there and brought them over here. And one of those Orkney lads had a baby on the hearth of the fur trading post. So all of a sudden, my head exploded. There's a story just sitting here waiting to be told. And I had no idea who she was. So I ran out to find out who she was. And her name was Isabel Gunn. And she cut her hair and disguised herself as a man and got herself hired on to Hudson's Bay. and came over here and worked in that for 18 months before she was outed by having a baby on the hearth of the fur trading post. So, that is an awesome story. That's an awesome thing to happen as far as something that happened historically. And when I was researching for that novel, I came across another just little footnote at the end of something that talked about another woman who was out there at the same time. And her name was Marie-Anne Gaboury. And she was from a little village, Masquinongé in Quebec. And she did not want to be a farmer's wife. Apparently, she was drop dead gorgeous and everybody had proposed to her, but she did not want to be a farmer's wife. Her father had been a farmer and he died in a farming accident. And her stepfather was a merchant in town. So she was not going back to the farm as somebody who was working a farm. And so a Coeur de Bois came back from the West and swept her off her feet. He was not going to be a farmer, and they fell madly in love. And because of circumstance, he had to go back out west. So she insisted that he take her with him. And both she, Marie-Anne Gaboury, and Isabel Gunn wound up in Pembina, which is directly south of where you are. It was in Canada at the time. It's in North Dakota now, where there was a Hudson's Bay Company fur trading post plus a Northwest Company fur trading post right beside each other across the Pembina River, which is a very little river. And they were both there at the same time, same place, and they had their babies a week apart from each other. And there is no historical record of that ever happening, or of them ever meeting, or any of that happening. So I got to have them meet. And as they say in the business, hijinks ensue. And they have to depend on each other. They become very good friends, and they have to depend on each other to survive. So when you can get just a little thing, a little historical detail, and you start pulling that as a thread, and it can take you anywhere. And I really was in the mood at the time to be galloping over the plains with the wind in my hair, feeling free. And so by writing a story like that, you can be.
Now, interestingly, you said these women were not even mentioned. Nobody got to know about them at the time. They didn't write anything about them, but you stumbled into their own information. Is that what you say?
Well, they were known about, but there was no record of them having met in Pembina.
Okay.
So
no record of them having met.
But they
people
had,
knew them.
yes, they had their babies a week apart. Well, Isabel Gunn was known as being a disgrace because she was there as an imposter. She had hidden her identity, and then she got busted for it. So that was known about her. And then Marie-Anne Gaboury, she and her husband went on to be, he was Jean-Baptiste Lagimondière. I don't know if you've heard of that, but there are places named after them out west. So they became a power couple. She had like a whole truckload of kids, and they lived for a long time, and they were everybody knew about them. I suspect in Winnipeg, if you were to ask people, have you ever heard of Marie-Anne Gaboury or Jean-Baptiste Lagimondière? There is the Louis Riel Museum in Winnipeg, and they have mannequins of them in that museum. So they were known and they were part of history at the time. But the thing that blew my mind was that they could be in the same place at the time doing the same thing with the babies. And no one had ever written about that.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to research. You've gotten me curious now. I'm going to research them.
Okay.
Okay. So what survives history and what gets forgotten?
Well, forgotten or is something that is not able to be translated over generations. For example, think back to what you know about your great, 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 great grandparents.
Absolutely nothing.
Exactly. You might be lucky enough to know, if you did some genealogical research, you'd know when they were born, when they got married, when they had kids, when they died. I mean, that's basically what you know about them. Now, you might have somebody who wrote a journal, and so you would have a little more information about that person's life. But think of the things that can't survive. I mean, their hopes, their dreams, their secrets, their disappointments. Those kinds of things are not likely to survive. First of all, because they don't want them to. And second of all, you don't have a way of putting life onto a page. You know, part of being a writer is selection. And so you can't possibly render a human being over time and keep all the complexity of that person. So that's the job of a fiction writer. You can take the facts of their existence. I know when Isabel Gunn got on that ship, I actually got the captain's manifest. The Hudson's Bay Company has a whole building in Winnipeg, the Hudson's Bay Company Archives. And I went there because I wanted to find out where she was when she got pregnant. And you go in there, they give you a pencil and gloves, and you ask for what you're looking for. And I got the journal written by the factor at the Fort Albany Fur Trading Company. And they recorded every day what all of the employees did, what they hunted, what they built, where they went, because they had to go off and take provisions down the rivers and that sort of thing. So I saw that at the time that she must have gotten pregnant, they were building new cabins at Fort Albany. So she must have been able to get a little bit more privacy than she would have. She wasn't in a bunkhouse with, 12 guys on bunk beds. She would have been able to get a certain amount of privacy. So there are facts for sure that you can get that are primary documents. Then you can get secondary documents. That there was a book written about Marie-Anne Gabry detailing so many details of her journey going from Montreal out to Pembina. Horrendous things happening. And so I was able to get all of those facts, but you don't know what goes on in a person. When I went and tried to discover who Isabel Gunn was, I was very dismayed to find out someone had beat me to the punch, and they had already written a novel about her. So I went and read the novel, and I was really surprised how differently I viewed Isabel Gunn from the way the other writer did. And I mean, nobody's right or wrong. We're all using the same facts, right? But I just saw her really differently. I saw the people around her differently, her circumstances differently. So we can all use the same facts, but we breathe in the humanity to the person and the personality and the reactions to their lives. And that can be very different depending on the person seeing it. So what can survive and what can't? I mean, think about what your great-great-great-great-children will know about you. And what kind of trail they can watch you on podcasts. They can, they'll have some factual things, but they can't possibly know what your secrets are right now.
No, they can't unless I write them down in a diary or something.
Yes, and even if you write them down, you're going to edit some of that stuff in a way that suits you. So
that's true.
Yeah.
Hey there, have procrastination, perfectionism, or self-doubt still stealing your dreams? What if you could finally finish that one project, your book, your course, your podcast in just 12 weeks? That is exactly what we do inside the Delay to Daily Action course, a proven system to help you plan, focus, and follow through. And right now, it's 15% off until the end of the year. Don't wait for the perfect time, because this is your time. Click in the link in this episode show notes to start turning delay into daily action. And I'll see you in the course. So can you give us some insight from your novels, Everything I Hope For and A Small Compass?
Some insights in what are you thinking about?
What are these books about? Who did you spotlight in those books, and what were you thinking when you were writing these books?
Okay, well, with A Small Compass, I was just telling you about the two women that I discovered.
Okay, so that is for those two women.
That's for those two women. And I wrote, once I discovered the both of them, it went from just a book about Isabel Gunn to a book about both of the women, and I interspersed their journeys as they were both making their way to the same place in the same condition. I told their stories, and then the story kind of took off in a new direction when the two of them met there. I learned about history for my first two. This Godforsaken Place was the first one, and Small Compass was the second one. And I learned about those through research. So I didn't know about those worlds unless I could find documents to help me understand what those worlds were. The Everything I Hope For was different. It's still a historical technically, but I lived through that time. So I didn't need to go around looking for facts and trying to piece things together in the same way I did for the first two. So probably in some sense, it's less accurate because I'm going from memory, and memory is a very tricky thing to base anything on, but it gives you a more sensual experience of history, that you're actually living it rather than recording it and trying to imagine it. You don't get up every day and say, well, what are the historical circumstances today? You just get out of bed and you try to survive, and you try to pursue what you hope for, and you are affected by the historical circumstances that you're born into, but they seem more in the background of just trying to get through life. So there's a more sensual rendering of it, what it smelled like, what it tasted like, what it sounded like, what it felt like, and that's what you get in that story. That's a little bit different from the other two.
Okay. Let me just ask you a side question based
Okay,
on what we've discussed so far.
sure.
Okay. You got a spark of idea, maybe doing something, I would say, unrelated, and then you found this spark of idea. You saw this woman and you said, wow, there's a story here.
Yeah.
So for someone listening to this show, this episode, and the person is just got that same spark of idea on something and said, wow, you know what? I could do something with this. Can you give like a step-by-step guide? It doesn't have to be like perfect. Can
Yeah.
you give a step-by-step guide on what should the person do next after getting the spark? So what next?
Well,
How can you bring it to life?
there are so many different ways that writers work. If you got 10 writers in a room and you asked them what their process was, I can guarantee they'd all be different. So it's not as if there's one way to write a story, but there is a craft to it. With everything I hope for, it's probably the most autobiographical novel I'll ever write. And so I've been writing it for 40 years because I had much content, but I did not have the craft of how to turn it into a story. So by the time it becomes a story, it's been so munched around and things have been collapsed and things have been left out and things have been taken in a different direction. That's why it's fiction and it's not autobiography, but you take from your life to put into a story. So this ended up being my fourth novel. And I needed it to be my fourth novel because I needed to have enough in the way of writing chops to be able to craft a story out of it. There's one thing to have. Many people say that everyone's got a story in them, which is the story of their own story, their own life. And that's very true. But there is a big difference between just having a story that is your life and a story that is actually crafted as a story. There are many things that go into technicalities that go into making a story. So this would be one thing that your listeners might want to ask themselves. Do you want to be an author? Do you want to be a writer? Or do you just want to write a book? Because if it's the book that you want to write that is sort of your story, it might be the only thing that you want to do. And that would take you in a very different direction because to become a writer, it's a long, long process. And I have told many people that if don't become a writer or do a PhD or have children unless you really want to, because they both take so much time and so much energy that you have to be really willing to be in it for the long haul. If you want to write a book like about your life or that's inspired by your life, you could hire a ghostwriter. That would be a perfect meld between you having the content that you want in there and hiring somebody for the skill they have in making a story. I was at a speaking engagement last year and a woman came up to me and said, "You write about incredible women. Well, my aunt was an incredible woman and I've got a whole box of stuff about her. She was, distinguished in this way and that way and the other way. Why don't you write it about her?" Well, writing a novel takes years of your life. And so she didn't want to be a writer, but she wanted to write a story about her incredible aunt. And so that's what I suggested to her. Get yourself a ghostwriter because then what you don't have, that person has. And between the two of you, you can put together a story that shows how incredible she was and make her a character that rises above just beyond being your aunt into something that, lots of people would identify with. And another thing that is very different about fiction is it's the only kind of writing there is where you actually step into somebody else's consciousness. Now, when you think, most books are nonfiction books, and they are implicitly presenting an argument to have you either agree with the writer on some issue or accept that these facts are as you've arranged them and argued that they operate. So that is going through an intellectual process where you're analyzing what you're being offered as an argument and deciding whether or not how much of this you're going to buy. But in fiction, you actually become that person. You step into that person, and suddenly you can see the world from that person's perspective. You can see what things look like and taste like and feel like. And that's why fiction can be so transformative, that as soon as you get into somebody else's head and you see things, they become obvious in a way that nobody could really convince you of via an argument. You're living it out and you're experiencing it in a different way. And you're experiencing it in a way that you experience your life because you were in that person's mind going through a life. So
I like that. I like that perspective. I've never seen it that way before.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, you're no doubt your listeners have as a story to tell, but it doesn't mean that they want to devote the rest of their lives to writing, and that's an author's path. But if they, there are things you can do. There's the Editors Association of Canada. You can actually hire an editor who is a ghostwriter. Probably a ghostwriter would be better to help you script out the structure of a story and actually get the thing done.
Thank you. So, encouragement for busy women who want to write but feel overwhelmed. So they are listening to this episode. They want to write, but they feel overwhelmed, or some of them have self-doubts. Like, I don't think I can do this. What advice do you have for them?
Well, I mean, you can have self-doubt about anything you do, and probably the best antidote to do it is to just do it. And then, I have a children's book coming out next year, and it's called Beat the Clown, and it's all about my first son who was afraid of clowns. And so in the story, he goes and there's a big mural on the wall at the library. And so his little imaginary friend Puka says, well, you just go and beat the clown. You push on the nose of the clown. And then if you do that, you confront your fears. Your fears aren't as big. And so the rest of the story is about that, and that you need to just face your fears directly, and then they start to shrivel. So the thing that I have noticed in my life that I'll share with your readers that might be helpful is when I was writing my my Harlequin and going to school and that sort of thing, I had to fight for my writing time because I had my two children. And the whole time that I was bringing them up, I was not having enough time to write, but I was writing. And it made my writing time special and exciting because I had to fight for it. And I sometimes think of people who have nothing to do but write 9 to 5 every day. And I think, at some point, that would almost become a burden because you would start putting expectations on yourself. It's hard to keep excited with all of that time before you. So because my writing time was always that precious to me that I had to fight for it, I never had a problem motivating myself because, here I've got this time, I'm going to make the best of it. And one could argue, that's just sort of the life of a woman that you have to do. But here I am at this age, and I'm doing it again with a new generation. Because now I had two sons, and they each had a daughter, and they are now 2.5 years old. So they're little toddlers, and I'm very involved in their lives. And I have to fight for my writing time because I am now helping to bring up a new generation of kids. And that it's as fresh and exciting and precious to me now as it was, 30, 40 years ago. And
Yeah.
I have to take responsibility for having done this to myself because here I am going around the same post again in the same condition. So I have accepted that it's me doing this, not the world doing it to me. I'm doing it to myself. And the cross fertilization is exciting because I'm on fire intellectually and I feel all filled up emotionally. And it's my personal recipe for happiness. So I don't worry about the self-doubt part because I don't have time. I have made it so that I don't have time. So what I do is I pick away at it, and then eventually you come up with something. But it might outrun your skill. And that is something that you would need to do something about. When I was doing my first Harlequin, I had sent in 3 or 4 proposals to Harlequin and gotten rejected for them. And I had another one I was about to send in, and I just thought, oh my God, I can't cope with getting another rejection. They just got form letters. And so I called a local college where they were teaching how to write a romance. And I said, could you please have that instructor get in touch with me. And she had been an editor at Harlequin in previous years. And so I hired her, and it wasn't very much money. It was just, we would sit down for an hour and she would help me think through the brand new story I needed to start from scratch because what I had was not going to work. And it became my first novel. And having her bring me knowledge to build my skills, and I couldn't have known what she knew. She was exactly the person I wanted to write for on the other side of that desk. I wanted an editor at Harlequin to say, yes, I want that story that works. And she knew that. And so that's where that fast tracked me from having to learn, reinvent the wheel. I actually had a coach, and it was very, very helpful.
So I'm going to say, I like the bit you said, you protected your time.
Mm-hmm.
It was precious to you, so you protected that time, and you were excited when you were doing it because those were protected time. I love that concept. And the idea of getting a coach to also help is a good one.
Like she just charged, however much an hour she charged, but she would spend an hour with me, and then I would have my marching orders to go out and spend, days, if not weeks, doing what she was suggesting I do. And then I was with her for another hour. She would take an hour to read it, an hour. So it's not very many hours to pay somebody.
Yeah.
If people are worried about money, it's not a lot. They don't make very much money.
I agree with you.
Mm-hmm.
So where can this audience find you?
Well, they can certainly find me at my website, cindagault.com, and I have my podcast there, so you will wind up there. And I have a lot more information about my books and my stories. And if people are interested in the stories that we've talked about, you can find them on Amazon or at my publishing company, which is Grey Goose Press. You can just Google that. And if you go to Amazon, just type in my name and the books will come up.
Thank you very much, Cinda, for coming to this show.
Well, it's my pleasure. It's so nice to meet you.
Thank you very much. Cinda has brought us into the past. Thank you for showing us what survives history and for reminding us that tenacious women exist in every era, including ours.
Yes.
Your stories encourage us to stand tall in our lives, to make room for adventure, even in busy seasons, and to write the stories we've been carrying for too long. Cinda is very busy herself, and she's able to put up all of this. So she's an inspiration to all of us. And to my listeners, if today's conversation stirred your creativity, don't let the spark fade. Download my free 7-day sprint workbook to help you. Go over to Cinda's website to get all the tools that she is providing to help you to take action on any story idea, podcast dream, or business project you've been postponing. The links to all of this will be in this episode show notes. Thanks for tuning in to the Minute Mastery podcast. If you have found this episode helpful, please share it with someone who could use more time in their day. And remember to subscribe. Check out the links again in this episode show notes and leave us a review. Until next time, you are in control of your time and you've got this.